What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, we've got another complete growing guide planned for all of you, and it's a complete growing guide on blueberries. So I'm really excited about today's episode. If you do like this episode, you'll probably like all the other complete growing guides that we've done. So I will link a playlist that we have that has, I think we're over 30 complete growing guides now. And I'll link that playlist so you can check it out, because if you want to grow things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes, you name it, I've probably done a video on it, and so it'll be a good resource for all of you to check out. Now, if you do check it out and you notice that I've not done a video on something, let me know in the comments box down below. I would love to add to that playlist, and I always love growing new things and showing you all how to grow things, so let me know. Now, with that being said, let's jump on into today's video. All right, so when you get your blueberry plants, these ones come in a soilless growing medium, and they are a plug. If you get bare root, you're going to treat them slightly differently. If your blueberry plants are bare root, you're going to soak them in water for about 2 or 3 hours before this step. Now, if they come in a plug and they are actually have the growing medium included, like these do, really healthy, high quality plants, you can actually continue on with this video. So if they're bare root, you're going to soak them for 2 or 3 hours and then come back to this part. Or if they're like this, we can just continue. The first thing you want to do is very counterintuitive, and it actually is kind of scary for a lot of gardeners. But what you want to do is you want to take the cell and you want to divide it in half and rip. And what you want to do is you want to rip it about 75% of the way. And what you'll notice is that then you have two sides that kind of flop like that. And that is actually going to increase the root size. It's going to increase root productivity. It's actually going to encourage new roots, help the plant come out of dormancy better. And because this plant is dormant, the damage to the roots really will be nominal. It really won't notice, because of the fact it's not growing yet, it won't notice that you've ripped it up and tore those roots. And that's going to allow the plant to have a much larger root system, which is going to host a larger, healthier plant. So that's the first thing we do. The next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about soil. Soil is a really important thing, no matter if you're growing in containers or in ground. Soil is probably the most important component to growing blueberries successfully, because blueberries love a very acidic soil. Blueberries prefer a pH of 6 to 6.5. So you don't want anything that's 7 or higher, because that gets to be neutral or even alkaline. So when it comes to blueberries, you want to make sure that you fertilize them with an acid-loving fertilizer, or use a lot of peat moss. Peat moss is very acidic. Sphagnum peat moss is something that's actually going to amend the soil rather than just temporarily fix it. So we're growing our blueberry in a container. This is a 7-gallon trade pot. And so this is plenty fine for about 3 to 5 years of growth from our blueberry. Now, if you're looking at longer than 5 years, you want to consider either going in ground or going into a larger container. After about 3 or 5 years, we're going to move this over to a wine barrel. And the wine barrel is where it's going to live for the rest of its life. We have 2 wine barrels on either side of our porch, and those are about 25 gallons. So it just depends on how long you plan on growing it for. It's going to be plenty fine in a container like this, like I said, for 3 to 5 years. And in this soil here, we have 1 part peat moss to 1 part compost. It's super important to have that peat moss because it provides that acidity that blueberries love. If you don't know if your soil is acidic enough, I recommend doing a pH test. It's very simple. You can simply take some soil, stick it in a glass of water, shake it up, and then get some pH test strips from your local pool supply company, dip it into the water. It'll tell you if your soil is slightly acidic or not. You do need your soil to be in that 6 to 6.5 range for the blueberries to do well. The next thing you can do is after a while, though, the peat moss is going to start breaking down. It's going to actually start to give away some of its acidity. The surrounding soil, if it's not already acidic, will actually kind of sap away some of the acidity from the peat moss, because it will always tend to revert back to its original pH. So if your soil is like a pH of 7, even if you make it slightly acidic for 2 or 3 years, over time it will work back towards that pH of 7. So what I recommend doing is regularly applying some granular sulfur. This is really inexpensive. You can get it from any garden supply store. very, very easy to obtain. I just take it and I throw it in a little container like this, a little quick hack, and just give a couple good shakes. The drainage holes in the bottom of the container act as almost like a salt and pepper shaker. And I will apply about a tablespoon of powdered sulfur or granular sulfur to the top of this container. Work it in, it's incorporated, and that's gonna make sure that the soil is nice and acidic. Now, the next thing you wanna make sure that you have is really well draining soil. The soil should not hold on to too much water. Blueberries are really finicky when it comes to too much water, and they'll start to rot very easily. So you wanna make sure that the soil you have is very well draining. Regardless if it's in ground or in a container, well draining soil is critical. The next thing you wanna make sure of is the location that you plant your blueberry. Now in containers, you can move them around a little bit. They're a little more mobile, but regardless of where you plant them, you need to make sure that they're going to get at least 7 hours of sun. Blueberries like full direct sun, so if you give them less than 7 hours, they may survive, but you're going to notice that the fruiting is dramatically decreased. So I prefer 7 hours up to 11 hours of sunlight for blueberries. The next thing a lot of people ask is temperature. Because blueberries are a perennial, they're going to come back year after year, and there's really no temperature range that blueberries won't grow in. Now, the range of growth when it comes to the zones is all the way up to zone 3. Blueberries are extremely cold hardy. Now, the next thing is when it comes to the types of blueberries, you have two different types of blueberries that are predominantly found. You have a low bush and a high bush variety. Low bush varieties are more of your wild ground kind of creeping varieties of blueberries. You see these a lot in Maine, which is the wild blueberry capital of the world, and they are really low to the ground. Or even in northern Michigan, we have some wild blueberries as well. And they really don't get much taller than about a foot tall. Whereas the high bush varieties, which is this variety right here, the high bush variety, this is a variety called Darrow. I absolutely love this variety. And I also really like, Patriot. It's another wonderful variety, as well as Blue Crop. So a couple different good varieties for you to check out. But these are all a high bush variety. These are going to get between 7 and 11 feet tall, so they get quite tall. You can prune them lower if you need to, but they will get quite tall on you. Now, the final thing to note with blueberries is watering. Before we get planting, is watering. And fertilizer. So when you're watering these, you want to make sure that you water them regularly. During the summer dry months, especially if they're in a container, they're going to dry out much faster. And you want to make sure that in a container, you're watering about every week. It's going to seem like you're watering these a lot, but that's because they don't like to dry out. If they do dry out, you're going to notice the leaves start to turn red. Once they turn red, they'll phase to brown, and once they're brown, they're dead. So you want to make sure that you catch them at that kind of like light green phase before they start to turn kind of a golden orange, rust orange, because that is still a salvageable stage when you can revert them, but that means they're getting too dry, and it also could mean that the soil is not acidic enough. All right, and the final thing before we get this planted is fertilizer. These are going to require 2 fertilizings per year. We've already fertilized this potting mix here that we're planting it in, but regardless of where you're planting it or how you're planting it, you want to make sure that you do give it 2 fertilizings per year. We use an all-purpose fertilizer. We use Trifecta Plus as our fertilizer. That's what we use on our entire garden. It's an all-purpose fertilizer that's intended for organic gardening, so it's very gentle, but it is very concentrated, and it's going to last all season long, which is great. It has trace minerals, microbes, beneficial bacteria and fungi. It's got the macronutrients as well, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and it also has fast-acting and slow-release components to it. So it's our preference, but use one that you like and that you love. And also, you want to do it twice a year. So we're going to do it once in the spring before it breaks dormancy, and then once just before it goes dormant in the fall. And that's just going to make sure that the plant is ready to go dormant. It's going to establish a nice strong root system, which is going to make it come out of dormancy much stronger in the spring. So it's all about that cycle. Got to keep it healthy year round. So now that you've done that, the final thing is planting. It's important that when you are planting your blueberry, you want to make sure that you do not bury it any deeper than its original soil level, because blueberries are very prone to rot. You want to make sure that you don't bury them deeper. And we've also splayed the roots out. We've kind of taken them, splayed them out, and set them flat. That's going to increase the root mass of the blueberry, really help it to root out nicely. Backfill. There we go. And we are planted. It's that simple. The final thing that I thought was worth mentioning is pests. Once you've got this planted and it's growing, it should start flowering in about a year or two, especially if it's one of this size. Once it starts flowering, it will produce fruit. Having a cross is important. That will help increase production. But regardless of if you have 1 plant or 5 plants, you're going to encounter pests. The most common pest you're going to encounter is not a caterpillar or a borer or a moth or anything like that. It's going to be birds. Birds are going to definitely be your biggest pest because they love the blueberries. Now, the best way to deter them is just to use bird netting. It's just a fine mesh that you drape over your plants. And I recommend doing that about 2 weeks before the berries start to ripen, because birds will wait until the berries are at peak ripeness. That is kind of their preferred time to consume the berries. But you'll notice that they go from a kind of a white to a kind of a green. Well, start green to kind of a frosty white, and then that frosty white will transition to a pink and then to a blue, and or like a deep purple. And so when it comes to the ripeness phase, you want to start to cover them at the point when they're starting to go from pink to purple, and that way you have enough time to cover them so that the birds don't hone in on them and get them. Also, if they get really big, you can construct a cage to wrap them up with. But blueberries are a crop that really doesn't have many pests other than birds. So it's one that is really easy to grow, very rewarding, and one that, like I said, can produce tons and tons of fruit for you. On a given plant like this, you can expect at full maturity to get 3 to 5 pounds of blueberries very easily. Upwards of 10 pounds can be achieved. So they're very productive, very rewarding, like I said, and it does help if you do have a second plant to help with cross-pollination, but they are self-fruitful, so they will produce fruit on their own. It just helps to increase production, so consider that as well. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home, and we'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.